Welcome back to another episode of Anomthara. Today, we're going to discuss the shamanic instruments or ceremonial sound making tools used for making music, making sacred sound effects, or for drawing a person's consciousness to a specific state. Starting with shamans, witch doctors, priests, priestesses, and any other term you have for an individual whose main job, career, or vocation is the spiritual and psychological, emotional health of the individuals in their community. And you'll find this in every culture. You'll even find it in modern times. We have psychologists and we have psychiatry and all of that other, that's basically modern shamanism. You add the medicine, you add the doctors with surgery and all that other stuff. And that is just the modern application of the shaman or the witch doctor or the priest or the priestess. Now, all of them around the world had tools. In modern times, people think, oh, well, the priest's tool is the crucifix. No. Well, what about the censer in the church? Well, that's one of them. There are plenty of tools, but typically an item like the crucifix, you could say that's a tool, but that's more of a symbol or an icon, which are utilized for different reasons and for different effects. A spiritual sound making tool is typically utilized, as I stated before, to draw the consciousness to a specific state. Different instruments can be utilized for different outcomes. So, for example, we would use a drum typically to draw a person's attention and heart rate to a specific rhythm. And in doing so, we can affect the psychology as well as the physiology, so the chemicals in the brain and the body of the individual or group of individuals. You'll find that with music bowls, it's a very similar concept where it's using the sound frequencies to work on the emotions of the person as well as, and therefore, the mind. When you move on to rattles, rattles specifically work on the auditory part of the psychology and draw a person's subconscious state in and all of your subtle awarenesses. It draws those up and draws them to the correct frequencies and correct states of matter. As far as states of matter, the states of being, you typically have about four. There's your physical body, there's your emotional body, then there's your mental body, and then you have your spiritual body. Of those four bodies, each instrument can affect one or all of those other bodies. Music and sound are quantum forces. This is a relatively new discovery. I believe I read it in Scientific Magazine last year, which would have been in 2024. But they have found that music or sound or the sonic frequencies, they travel across space, across time. They can ride along the same wavelengths as tachyons, which is a form of energy that flows backwards across time, if you can wrap your head around that. They affect elemental matter. They affect, because they are energy. All matter is energy. So, for example, if you've ever seen the experiment where they're playing different kinds of music in front of the fire and it changes the way the fire burns, that is because the quantum frequencies are actually altering what's happening with the molecular combustive process or the fire that is happening. They have found that it can affect all kinds of things, including they can utilize music to create an observer effect and then alter that observer effect. They can use sonic frequencies to affect how molecules combine, how molecules break apart, and which ions and electrons can be exchanged between individual atoms. These are all affected by sound. So it would only be reasonable to think then at that point that if I were to make a specific guttural sound, that sound, regardless of if I was actually having an emotion yet, that sound could potentially trigger a completely different emotion. So, for example, I could be happy and then growl and then feel the emotion of anger start to well up, but then remind myself, hey, I'm happy, I'm just playing around, and then make it go away. This is how actors utilize techniques to fall so far into a role that I'm sure, like I have, you have heard stories about actors who could not come back out of the role and it became life threatening, and other actors who, because the role required um, the character kill themselves for the story, then the actor will then turn around and actually be at risk of killing themselves. And there have been many who have. If you follow, speaking of sound, if you follow voice acting at all, any of the voice actors, you'll find that some of the problems that a lot of the same problems that were happening to these method actors that were acting out physically on theater and in movies were having were happening to 10 or 100 times worse to these voice actors, because a, they had no support that the other physical actors had. B, nobody applied the same ideas of stress and detachment to voice acting, because people just assumed that it was just a different caliber of acting, lower caliber, therefore lower requirements, lower detachments, all that stuff. It'd just be easier. When in reality, we're finding now, with the reinforcement of all of the sound and the fact that these actors are in a closed booth, usually, where they're isolating themselves with them, the role, and the sound over and over and over for hours and days and months until they have it perfect. All that sound is effectuating them in a way that it is turning them into a specific person with a specific psychological, physical, emotional, and spiritual state. There, excuse me, there is a show, an anime called Neon Genesis Evangelion. Anybody who knows me is going to know that I mention this one a lot, especially for people who are in the coming of age years of their life. This show is fundamental for what it teaches and what it gets you to actually ask yourself questions. It makes you ask yourself. So this show produced produces actors for the main character, Shinji, who usually end up having psycho-emotional problems during the time that they're doing the Shinji role. And this all started out with Spike Spencer, the first actor to portray him in the English dubs. And the actor literally became Shinji. He became Shinji all the way to the point to where the guy started living in the same life, down to the same lifestyle, the same responses to questions. Like he started wearing the same clothes, everything. He just became that character, to the point that other actors and the directors and everybody in the crew started noticing, hey, something's wrong here. When we say, okay, break, let's go for lunch, let's go for have a tea, let's go get drinks after work today, this guy acts like he hasn't left the role. This guy acts like Shinji. And it happened two different times that this guy ended up falling into the role so bad that people had to go get him and get help for him. Go get him to get help. And then the third time around, they started noticing again. But by this point, something called the Voice Acting Alliance had come around, and they actually started creating benefits groups and help groups and funds for all of these different things, that services that voice actors would need, because of the amount of things that they're dealing with that people didn't think were a problem for voice actors, that they knew was already a problem for physical actors. And long story short, he got the help he needed, and it revolutionized the industry, because it opened up all of these angles, all this understanding, and all of these, as well as additional skills in acting. Once they could identify you could go that far in, well, then if there's a way out, then let's keep on going that far in to make sure we pull off these amazing roles. So let's zoom back out to what we're talking about. If you could have a specific sound, an instrument that would make a specific sound that could sync you into being able to pull off a specific role, well, I'm sure that'd be $1 million instrument, wouldn't it? And that's why there are voice acting courses that are quite expensive. But the same is true for these priests and priestesses, witch doctors and shamans. You go to Egypt, and on the walls, they have depictions at Dendera, the temple site at Dendera, where they show the priestesses have a hand instrument that they utilize to broadcast the music needed for their prayers and their ceremonies, especially for when they're making their special wines. That instrument is producing a very specific frequency that magically or physically, quantumly, is on a quantum level creating a different effect that they say is magic or blessings or spirituality. Well, it's that same question. What if you had a tool to pull this one thing off? Well, we have tools like electric guitars, we have tools like violins, where we can say this is a tool for pulling off this specific kind of emotion or this specific type of state. Like, you can strum your guitar in a way that'll make a person feel happy. You can strum the guitar in another way that makes them feel angry. And same is true with violin. You can draw tears from a stranger with a violin, and the person might not even understand what is happening. I heard a piece of music done so beautifully once that it drove me to tears. And I'll just say it's the complete ode to joy. The whole thing, all of it, beginning, opening movements, all of it, all the way to the end. The opera singing, all of it. I highly recommend going and looking that up. I think it was by the London Philharmonic, the one I watched. But it was, I, this it's hard to even use words to describe what that song can really bring out of you when it hits you with the full range of the orchestra, with the full range of the choir, all the right frequencies hitting you. And I'm watching it through a computer screen with a built-in speaker, so I'm not even having HD sound or anything like that. And yet I was crying, eyes in my hands crying because of how powerful that music was. It was on a quantum level. It was affecting me on all four of my bodies, and creating, like I felt like heaven. I felt like joy. I felt all of these things, and because of this one song. And then, you know, friend comes walking in the room, sees me just bawling my eyes out, like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yo, I'm so okay. I'm amazing right now." They're like, "Okay, weirdo." But that's just it. These shamans and these witch doctors and these priests and priestesses had already figured this out in ancient times, and it's been going around the world. We have drums, rattles, rain sticks are typically the main instruments used. you if any of you have ever been a part of religious ceremonies, whether it's something with Christianity and Christian church related, or in the jungles in a sacred medicine ceremony, or with the pagans and the Wiccans, in all of these circumstances, and I have participated in all of these, and so I'm not talking like, oh, poo poo on these people or poo poo on those people. No, I'm saying that having experienced them all, these are all equal to me, because the approaches, the outcomes, the reason behind all of it, it's all the same. It's, let me take you, who is human, in a mundane natural state, and some would say even an unnatural state, maybe even less than human, and let me give you a taste of something from a higher state. The idea being that it will help elevate you. Not that I am forcing your elevation, but that one taste of what that greener grass on the other side of the hill is will entice you to go and find it for yourself, to go and create that for yourself. People talk about manifesting a reality, or bringing a higher reality down into this one, or raising this earth into a higher dimension, into another one. It's all the same, whether it's the music or the singing. The idea is I'm using an instrument to create this effect that I'm having trouble create on my own, or I have mastered the ability to use my voice to create that same effect. It's all frequency based. We can get into all of the science of it. And there is a lot of science backing this up. It's so easy, you can Google it. So let's just leave it at that. If you want to Google that science. For the purpose of this discussion, let's stick to the metaphysical. So, the shaking of the rattle or the beating of the drum induces trance like states. Now, this allows the shaman, as well as the individual participating in the ceremony, to travel to other states. This could mean holding a container to bring spirits, guides to you. This also means taking that container like a starship, to go sci fi on you, and putting everyone in the seats and then flying the starship to the other side of the galaxy and back. There's also the idea of astral projecting into the astral plane and then taking people on a spirit journey. Whatever your interpretation of what's going on, whether it's by the mushrooms or by the ayahuasca or by the San Pedro or the peyote, it really does not matter what your individual trip looks like technically. What matters more is that the trip or the journey is happening at all. Now, let me explain that. That might have been a little confusing. There is a lot that can happen in the spiritual journey that will just hit you 100 miles per second. And then there's a lot because of the state that you're in. You're not in a deeply psychological, surface level, hey, I'm just walking down the street state. Typically, that's not how these things work. And if you are walking down the street on any of these, you that is wrong. You need to set in setting is is a huge part of any of these ceremonies. And people talk about how that's a huge part of any trip or any psychedelic process. Well, it's because they are the same thing as well. The psychedelic process and the spiritual process are both taking you into those other bodies and into those other realms. The entities that you run into, I have come to understand, and many orders teach it, that those entities are specifically only entities in your reality. Now, that does not mean it's all in your head, so disregard it. That's where modern science and modern understandings have skewed this one. If I were to go into my inner realms, into the astral plane, into the ayahuasca trip, for example, or the mushroom trip, and then I see faceless man standing there. I'm not talking Game of Thrones. I'm talking a guy with no face standing there. I would be like, "Whoa, what the heck does that mean?" What as a what I have come to understand is that the best thing you could do is ask, "Who are you? What do you represent? Why are you here? Who are you as opposed to me?" All these questions of to try and gain an understanding for what that is, because it is only showing up because my inner systems are trying to explain or trying to divulge some form of information that I can only understand and can only be interpreted through some kind of visual medium. And that's how your mind breaks things down and interprets things, is in visual information. There's no like data stream of code like in the computers or in the Matrix movies. It's just images. And if you're one of the people who has that condition where your brain does not create images, then your brain is creating concepts via a different mechanism than straight images, probably via some kind of an internal auditory type system. And I've heard it described from people who have no way of visualizing in their head, that instead that they auditorially they audioize, I guess you would say, in their head instead. And that way it's a simple as a discussion between two individuals, but it's more like they're discussing between themselves, not in any crazy sense, but in a very logical, very, okay, if I say this, does that mean this? Well, if I believe this, then does that mean that? It doesn't mean that just because you can't see pictures in your head that you're incapable of thinking or that you're weird or anything like that, or vice versa. It just is a different approach. There are people where I have one best friend who every time he tries to explain a concept to me, even if I already know the concept, the way he explains it, I'm like, what? And then he re-explains it, and I'm like, okay. And then he gets me a third time, and I'm like, oh, that's what you mean. Okay, you're saying this. And it's just how some people are just, I want to say the word programmed, even though I just said there's no coding in you. But that is, not like the Matrix, but that is your background programming. Is I have learned to explain things in the world this way, as it has been explained to me, and therefore, when I run into somebody who has had a different experience, it's going to be different. And speaking of those, the one thing in common between all of these is the sacred instruments and the sounds that they make. That is the one common denominator. I have participated in rituals from completely different cultures, and I have found that some of the tools, some of the songs even are the same. You'll find that the um the Lord's Prayer is tonally exactly the same as some of the mantras that exist in India and in Buddhism. So in Hinduism and Buddhism. That's very interesting. Now, Hinduism and Buddhism branched out from each other, and so they're already sister religions. It makes sense that they would share certain mantras, certain rituals, certain things. But nobody is saying that that Hinduism and Christianity sprouted from the same source. And yet, we still use a lot of smoke, a lot of mushroom, a lot of the same kinds of instruments, a lot of the same kind of singing. There you have it. It's because we have understood that despite how different you and I may be, the drum rattle, the horn rattle, or the shamanic drum, those might bring us to the same space and the same resonance frequency of harmony that otherwise no other conversation might have brought us to. I've noticed in certain ayahuasca settings how there'll be people that'll show up and I'll be like, man, there's no way I don't like that guy at all. And they'll have a conversation with the other guy and be like, man, I really, wow, just sharp disagreements. And then during and after, I'll be like, these guys, I feel like I grew up with these guys. I feel like I'd give anything for these guys and girls. I mean, like, these are my people. And just the words my people do not describe how much they are my people. And how do you how would I have been able to achieve that kind of relationship with any of them outside of that specific process. Now, the shaman during those processes used a lot of music, and to this day, I remember some of those songs, even though I have trouble even identifying what the direct translation to English of those songs were. Yet, the feeling of what they were, the message of those songs was ingrained wholly into me, and I understood them entirely. And that's the power of these sacred instruments. I've been in churches where dude pulls out electric guitar, starts singing a song about Jesus, and it's like, okay, that's great. And then the crowd starts kind of swaying. It's like, okay, that feels great, but it's nothing compared to one of these ceremonial instruments and what it's capable of. And the reason why is because there really is an order where there is not an order to separate people out and say you're better than this and this person is more holy than that person. There is an order for these tools. You can take a rain stick and you cannot achieve the exact same kind of effect as you can with a drum. And a horn rattle achieves a different effect than a horn drum. A horn drum achieves a different effect than a standard shamanic drum. You'll have different kinds of flutes, for example, that will also perform different effects based on frequency. You'll have a G note flute will be completely different than a C note flute, and they will be for performing different kinds of songs, different effects. Now, among the other tools that are utilized, you have, like I stated, drums, rattles, and rain sticks. You also have whistles and flutes. There are also another tool is incenses and various types of herbs and woods that are made for specifically not to smoke, like sucking the smoke in and creating an internal effect, but for the exterior outside effect. These incenses are auditory and allow for a reinforcement effect of the same thing that the music is creating. If you can imagine, the music is creating a bubble around you, of as far as the music, as the frequency of sound extends, it is that bubble, and that is the sacred space. When you also burn incense, or regardless if you do that or burn incense, the incense is creating a physical version of that sonic space. So if you were to take it like if sound was in the element of air, then you would be using the element of air in that ritual to fill the space and to create that sacred space. Air has been established. You take the incense can be considered fire, it can be considered earth, it can be considered both. It can also be considered, depending on the incense, it can be considered water too. It can be all four elements by itself. And so let's say you're burning incense along with the music, or no, let's take out the music entirely. You're burning only incense. The incense is creating a space as far as the smell is concerned. As far as the smell extends, that is your sacred space. So people like to use the incense to fill a room or fill a shrine room or fill their bedroom or their living room or their temple. That is what they're doing, is they're trying to fill every little spot. And the smoke can do that on a physical level first. And once it moves into the smell level, that's where the physical becomes the mental and the physical becomes the spiritual, and things start to translate over. I've heard people say that, well, the smoke itself is what drives the spirits away. And there is an alchemical explanation to that. However, I still believe it really is more about the energy is what's driving them away. I mean, I've never imagined that, I blow some sage in a specific room and that all of the spirits go, blah, 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 cough, 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 and scatter out. I don't see that. And it's the same as blowing tobacco smoke into a room full of LDS people and they all just scatter because, smoke, it's tobacco. That's not what happens with spirits. It's more like, because like I could light up some incense, throw the incense into a rave, and what great holy divine thing did I, what great what clean space did I create there? Didn't do anything. Well, that's not true. It probably just enhanced a little bit of what was already going on, because even in a rave, there are certain spirits. It probably, just kind of adjusted the way those spirits are behaving, doing, flying through in and out of everything. So the incense would have an effect, but it would definitely not clear out the container. It would just add another layer to that container. Now, if you were to say, all right, I want to take this bedroom or this living room that everybody frequents in my house, and I want to convert it into a sacred space, that's different. Then you would do the incense. But because the space has physically been utilized for other things, a lot of other things, physically by other people, being moved through constantly, all this other stuff, I would, and it's probably full of other things too that aren't a part of the space you're creating. First thing you do is you remove all the things that do not belong in the container, and that's your setting. And then you begin burning the incense, you turn on the music, you play your instruments if you have the sacred instruments, and you create a ritual. And in doing so, by including the four elements, by including your intentions, and then by also including mediums that cover the four realms, so like I said, the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual, then you are now all bases covered. Things like the four directions definitely does matter, because what you're trying to do is make this space three-dimensional so that you can move your cleansings, your protections, your blessings into the four-dimensional, which transcends all barriers, right? When you anchor this with crystals and stones, what you're doing is taking a physical and spiritual medium that connects the spiritual and the physical world, and you're anchoring the mental and the emotional with the physical and the spiritual. And there's your four again. Symbols and talismans. Those are to be utilized in a similar way as the crystals. Now, I was taught this, and I fully believe it, that crystals are shamans. There's an entire thing into that, but long story short, every single crystal is an atomic matrix that contains within it the energy of consciousness of a being that has been here countless eons. The belief is that being knows what's best for the earth and what's best for everything on the earth, because it has watched it all go down, and through its own experience, it has learned. It has crystallized with that knowledge, and therefore will now share and guide based on that crystallization. So, when you have a talisman, the talisman is a similar idea, a similar concept, except instead of letting nature do it by however much time, you are having humanity intentionally utilize ceremonies and rituals to create something of that caliber. That something can gain a life of its own. It can become a living talisman or a living symbol, a living icon. But for the most part, it is also an anchor that contains, it's more of a conscious anchor, where it is consciously going to do A, B, C, and D. However, to a fault, in which case, if you're using this as a defense against all things that are outside of my intentions, let's just throw that out there, if that was a totem, and you lay that totem in a group ritual where you've got one or two other shamans trying to pull an effect off, you just blocked your other two shamans from being able to do anything. You just blocked all of the guides and spirits in the area from being able to assist, because of something as simple as, unless it's my intention. Well, that's everything but you, bro. It's everything but you, sister. So let's having having listed these, the purpose of divination is to basically, in modern terminologies, you're taking all of the data available at your fingertips and crunching it into a specific outcome using the equation that is tarot. Tarot is the equation, the mathematical equation, the algorithm. Even you put the thing through the algorithm, you get the result is, oh, I should live this way, or I should do this, or maybe I should, maybe this job is good for me, or maybe, getting married is to this guy's a good idea. You know, there's people that use it first. Should I go with this bank, or should I make this business deal, or should I buy stock in this, or should I buy some Bitcoin? How I'm going to quote The Foundation with this one, this TV show slash book by Isaac Asimov called The Foundation, where the man's awesome psychohistory calculations and math can only account for broad events. Guys keep on repeating in the books and in this TV series that they can't account for individual effects, nothing so specific. And yet, what can be less specific than the way an individual acts throughout the course of their life? How broad, how variable, right? I'm seeing a theme pop up where actually, yes, you can. You just need a completely different error correcting principle, a different algorithm based on the minuscule. The way the ancient peoples and the theosophists and the the religious tended to quantify and classify that is if it's everything bigger than you all the way up to the heavens, that's called macrocosmic. If it's everything anything smaller than you and smaller than all the heavens and smaller than you and all that, and that's microcosmic. So God is in heaven, God is heaven, God is the universe, God is all of creation. Things that big are for God. You are tiny, you are small, you're an individual, you could say insignificant in the scale of your village, your city, your country, your world, your universe. You're pretty minuscule. That's microcosmic. So if we take these two concepts, they cannot exist without each other. You can't just look at all of science and the universe and say, yes, everything bigger than me applies, but everything smaller than me doesn't exist. Not worth looking at, even if it did. By the same token, you can't say anything that is my size or smaller is worthy of my attention, but whatever is bigger than me is literally larger than life and not worth my attention. As some people would say, too rich for my blood. Let that sink in. And in reality, you have to have both. You have to be able, as a human being, to be able to look up and look down. You have to be able to look at the sky and wonder, as well as look at the ground and focus. And in doing so, we have created these divination tools and divination processes to help assist when we're trying to look up and can't understand what the heck we're seeing because there's so many constellations out there and I'm seeing pictures. What if these constellations are interacting with each other and not just up there just for me to look at? And now we've hit that's where your 2D starts to move into 3D. And then what if there was a great architect behind all that that's trying to utilize all this to speak to me? There's your 4D. But wait, what if I can utilize this to speak to it? And now you've hit 5D. The divination tools are literally just algorithms and error correction processes and all that's all they are is little tools and apps for us microcosmic beings to be able to understand and influence a macrocosmic environment. Ceremonial clothing is another tool I want to mention here because uh, have you ever seen anybody who's doing something very, very meaningful in their lives or in others' lives show up in their pajamas, in their underwear, spill coffee or spaghetti sauce all over their shirt and be like, nah, it's fine, and then show up for the thing anyway? Of course not. Because anything worth doing is worth doing right, and anything worth doing right is worth ceremony. And if you think about it, it's true. There's a ceremony to everything. Have you ever been teaching somebody a specific process that it was very, very, very important, in fact, critical that it be done very specifically this way? And then you even like stood there as you were going to show them, all right, watch me. And you prepared and you took a specific stance. And then you went through the whole thing and then you took another stance, like a pose. And like, all right, there, it's done. Did you get that? That was a ceremony. Whether you went by the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost or anything like that does not matter in words because you did that in action. In in modern terminologies, you may as well have done that in words. When you stop going, okay, so the manual to the car engine says I have to unplug the battery first, or I might shock myself. That's the same as, the Bible says that I better spiritually cleanse myself before I go into the temple, or God is going to burn me. And then you read how in the Bible there was a guy who went into the Holy of Holies without cleansing and without proper authority or whatever, and he got leprosy immediately. Well, that could just be a story. Or maybe The Ark of the Covenant's radioactive, and maybe you weren't supposed to go in there without protection because maybe you'd radioactive burn your ass, and maybe technology is only misunderstood. Sufficiently advanced technology is misunderstood to be magic. But that's the whole ancient aliens discussion that we could get into, ancient civilizations we could get into. But as far as ceremony, and yes, they had ceremonial clothing too. Ceremonial clothing, these are, it could be considered costumes that are adorned with symbolic elements. They could have specific patterns woven into the tapestry. There's one set of robes I want to create where I found that certain sewing machines can put different patterns like lightning bolts or little flowers of life, six pointed circles and things like that. Phew, that was one of the coolest things. I thought that there were only like 4 or 5 different patterns to sew in, and that's it. And all the machines are made that way, which maybe at one point it was that. But here I am, like, there's 30 different kinds. This person is showing me in a little manual to the sewing machine, and I'm just like, how is this not a bigger deal? Like, why isn't everybody sewing? It was freaking awesome. And then it's because you got to learn how to use the machine. You got to learn how to sewing and stick your finger with the needle a few times. And I remember doing that in high school and being completely turned off to the concept. But I remember having a wife that was all into that too. So I shouldn't say that in past tense. She's the current one. But these clothings, typically, whether it's your belief system reinforcing it or it's because of quantum physics and the way psimonics and certain symbols work on a quantum level, this clothes, you will find there is always some form of ceremonial clothes or an item worn by priests and shamans. You go all the way to the Catholics and the Pope and the priests, the archbishops, all of them, they have ceremonial clothing. You don't see the pastor climb up to the stand in a t-shirt and shorts on a summer day. No, he will approach the peer with his ceremonial clothing because just addressing the congregation is a ceremony. Walking around with the censer is a ceremony, and therefore the ceremony requires the physical process attached to it for cleansing, for setting up a space, a container for the invoking of certain spirits or guides. And even the Catholics do this. Even the Christians do this. They say in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That's invoking entities, guides, and spirits. Um, there are some orders of Christianity that directly call upon angels to come down and perform specific acts for the individuals in the name of God. That's calling down spirits and guides. Look to you, saying, "Hey, what would your grandfather do in this situation?" Or think about what your grandma would do. All that stuff, spirits and guides. And so we all do this. We all do this. The clothing, especially in some of these ancient circles, can be passed down, but I found that a lot more of the I don't want to say modern communities because these are communities that are founded from following the jungle ceremonies and the jungle shamans. So you could say it's more traditional, but what they're doing is creating their own from scratch. And so instead of going to the store and saying, I'm going to buy this shirt because it's got the flower of life on it, and then I'm going to buy this pants because it's got a cool pattern on it, and that's going to be my ceremonial clothes. While that is an approach, it's a very modern approach, but that is still the same approach ancients would have used. If you had a shaman who didn't know how to weave his own clothes out of fur, he would go to the market and find somebody, and then he would have that. And if he could request that somebody weave one in a very specific pattern because it's his belief system, that would just require more money or more something, more gratuity. But they all still did it. Just because that is your karma and you have no choice but to go hit the store doesn't mean that you are somehow any less holy or any less worthy. If you have the opportunity to source your own clothes, great. If your karma demands that you shop online, you go look around, and you really have to work to the bone to find your ceremonial clothing and your ceremonial tools, that, in my opinion, just serves you the more because it is a pilgrimage at that point that you're going on. And to a certain degree, all of us are on these pilgrimages. As soon as any of you decide, I'm going to go make an instrument, or I'm going to go learn this one thing, or I'm going to go apply this spiritual teaching, you go on pilgrimages. You go through initiations and you suffer ordeals all the way through. The idea of the clothing, though, is that it's another physical world item that sets you apart from said physical world. The idea being that because I clothe myself in this sacred garb, it moves me into a sacred space physically, out of this world into another world. So teleportation, basically. And it embodies in that, and it sheds onto that person the spiritual powers, the connections, the energies, stories from their heritage that are traditionally worn by shamans and utilized by shamans in this method. So if I were to use the Hebrew Choshen stones, which I have on a medallion that I can wear on my necklace, if I were to utilize that in ceremony, I would be invoking the Hebrew, the Judeo-Christian. I'd be invoking those Kabbalic rites and magics. Now, if I were to do that and then turn around and use Wicca, that would not jive at all. In fact, I might end up invoking the demons from the Order of the Hebrews instead, because when you invert things like that, you end up with outcomes anyway. There's no idea of, oh, because I screwed up this ritual, it fizzled out like in certain card games. There's no fizzling out a magic ritual. What you end up doing is attracting something else or pulling something else off. I've had it where a person's trying to do a pagan ritual to summon Aphrodite because they want more love and beauty in their life. Person, I can't remember exactly what they did wrong, but there was a very, very just slight thing. When we went over the process several times, we basically discovered he did this one thing slightly off. He either didn't wash something, or he set something down in the wrong spot. It was something that was clearly off, that when we looked at it, we were like, okay, that had to be it. Because when we identified who is the opposite of Aphrodite, who is the one thing that would like to see Aphrodite's ritual ruined, but then also is known for these specific effects, outcomes, or powers. And the person was descent upon by flies like you wouldn't imagine, and horrible smells. So the opposite of beauty and love, right? Well, we found out that that's basically Beelzebub, which by doing some work, we found that there is a connection to from Aphrodite to the goddess Inanna from Sumeria, and that the opposite, the one goddess who was the rival and enemy goddess to her, that led event a war and death of Inanna, was her sister Ereshkigal. Ereshkigal isn't typically known for directly, sending flies and plagues against you, but her husband is. Her husband's name is Nergal, the plague god. So that would explain a few things. It's not that he specifically summoned Ereshkigal, it's that what he did opened the door for not Aphrodite, but for Aphrodite's enemy, Nergal, who specifically acted so that Ereshkigal could remain innocent in her conflict with Inanna. Nergal stepped in and attacked her instead. That's what basically happened here. And this is all going off of belief systems and your own permission slips if you believe this kind of thing is possible. I personally do. But that's because I also believe in magical rituals, and I believe in the process of manifesting from human will physical outcomes. Now, going back to the ceremony, if the ceremony had been done perfectly, most likely that would not have happened, but we did find something was off. With the divination tools and music, that helps bring things in. So, for example, he was using a tool and he used it incorrectly. If he hadn't used any tools, he probably would not have had the risk of doing that part incorrectly. But the power of his ritual would not have been there either. And it was powerful because, like, he was swarmed. Like they somehow made it into his house. Like it was literally just because he wanted the blessing on him in his life, he got the curse in him in his life because of how he the outcome. In this case, having ceremonial clothes might have done some more protection on him, because then his very person would have been ceremonially clean and technically separate. And then, but then again, that is also playing this whole game of perceptions. Where was his mind at? Where was his personal beliefs at? Did he believe there was an actual line between him and the spell he was performing, the ritual he was performing, or did he believe that there was no difference, and therefore there should never be a difference? That because he was doing the spell specifically on himself, that of course, as there was no difference in himself as the pursuant or the seeker, and himself as the shaman or the doer. Now, something that you will see very prevalent among all of these is sacred symbols on them, sacred animals, for example. With all traditions, you'll have four sacred beasts. There's usually a scaly creature. There's usually a behemoth type creature. There's usually some kind of feline creature. And there's also some kind of symbol for something that's usually small, soft, and lovey-dovey, you could say. With the Andeans, you have the condor, which is the north or the sky, and usually typically is around the world is something with wings that is flight worthy. It symbolizes sky and air and something that is above the earth. And in the Indian tradition, it's the condor or the eagle. That's north. You go to east, and east is the jaguar. It can also be the lion. It can also be, it's symbolic of day, of sun. It can also be symbolic of stars, of starlight, of the light and the darkness, um, dawn. But usually, like I stated, the east is typically a feline. You go to south. South is a mixture. I would normally say it's typically the serpent, but serpent can be a small snake or a gigantic anaconda or a great and mighty dragon. In which case, you can't really say, well, it's always something small or it's always something scaly, because in parts of South Asia, the south is ruled by the elephant. In parts of Africa, it's ruled by the hippopotamus. And so those aren't reptilian at all, are they? They're not serpents. And yet it's because the southern beast is typically some kind of ruling principle, some kind of great ruling principle, typically magical, but also natural and death related, where you cannot deny this thing can take you out. I mean, yeah, the lion and the jaguar will still kill you, but typically you have a chance to fight it off or run away. Ain't no outrunning a hippopotamus. Ain't no stopping a charging elephant. A dragon wants you dead, you're dead. So the South is usually ruled by something that personifies that concept of something so big, so powerful, but so inevitable as death, the end, but also something so wise and so all powerful as the wisdom that can be gleaned from death, that can be gleaned from beyond time, but also can be lost permanently to time. And then moving on to the West. West is usually symbolized by the butterfly or the hummingbird. Now, that one's very interesting because, again, you go around the world and you'll see both of these things. Very interesting, because what do they both represent? What do they both have in common? Why an insect and then a bird of all things? Why that bird? Well, because for some reason the West was made to embody vibration. It was made to embody frequency. Well, that's interesting. The sun sets in the West, but at the same token, we see a lot of cosmic star alignments on the West. That's very interesting. The nighttime is represented by the West, as the daytime is represented by the East. So you have the moon as well. Now, there are nighttime butterflies, but are there nighttime hummingbirds? I don't think so. But then again, in spirituality, nighttime can happen during the daytime. That's what eclipses are for. Therefore, it's more of a perception or a concept or a timely thing. Again, there's time, but it's mostly like a moment by moment type of a time thing. Instead of the great expanse and the endlessness of time, it's more like the moment by moment fleetingness is of time. And the vibration that is embodied there is not only light and uplifting and happy, but also it's very definitive. It's very much, when you think of vibration, like look at your table and think of that table vibrates. How useful is that table? Not useful, unless there's a purpose to that vibration. Like, for example, if you had something on the table that needed to be buzzed in a certain way in order for a certain outcome, in which case that sounds like chemistry, that sounds like science, that sounds like there's alchemical processes at work. So maybe the West represents the work, represents that there is something that must be done. It represents an action, an active phase in the wheel. Now that's interesting. If the sun rises in the east, then it sets in the west. Something that rises does not impact the ground. Something that falls, something that descends impacts the ground. So therefore, the sun setting impacts the earth as the moon rises, except the moon does not rise in the west, it rises in the east. What is meant to be said here is the wing beat of the butterfly, or the wing beat of the hummingbird. The hum, the om, the om. I believe that what is being taught there in concept is the idea that there is a great cosmic, all encompassing force moving through everything else as a sonic hum, that quantum sonic frequency, that force in the cosmos that's quantum. There it is. Because north is sky, south is earth, east is fire, west is water. Now, doesn't water itself also rest at a specific frequency? Does not water also have the capability of retaining data and information? Water is both the source of and also the sustainment of life. It's the medium in which life can occur. It's the medium in which all other elements may transfer molecularly their states. Now, isn't that interesting? So then, the West, as well as the East, as the North and the South, the creature and the concept all mattered so integrally that across the world, it's something as simple as the concept of a wing beat here can affect something there. We've all heard this. Can a butterfly's wing beat create a hurricane on the other side of the planet? Can a hurricane on the hurricane wind force on the other side of a planet cause a butterfly's wings to beat? That might sound silly, but when we study concept inversion, we find that this is a serious concept worth considering. Disregard physics for a moment. Let's think about just the emotion, just the spirituality of this, just the energy of this. The idea that if everything in this universe is connected and everything is energy, cause and effect is in play, which means the wing beat of the butterfly leading all the way around the world into to eventually affect a hurricane. And the hurricane is on the same planet as the butterfly and is blowing wind even harder than the butterfly. So, by the same logic, the wind will come all the way back around at some point and cause the wing beat of the butterfly. That is the same as saying, well, the Big Bang caused everything that led to humanity eventually claiming God did it all. By the same token, God created everything up to this point that humanity claimed that the Big Bang did it all. At what point was there a so that they could, as opposed to a and then they did? Let me rephrase that. Did God create reality so that mankind could question that creation by proposing a Big Bang? Or did the Big Bang create reality that led directly to mankind claiming that a God did it? And at what point is the middle located in which case both are correct? That both the Big Bang was created for the purpose of God saying that he did it, but at the same time, what if God created the universe for the purpose of humanity claiming the universe itself Big Banged itself? And in the middle, if they're both the same argument, then that means that we have created the concept of infinity in a way that we are actually living it. Because in that argument, both can't be right, both can be wrong, and yet they both kind of are. This creates an Ouroboros, a snake eating its tail, or the infinity symbol, the figure eight, rendered in 3D. That is the concept of God. That is the original concept of deity, was infinity. Something that was both divine and not. Something that both existed and didn't. Something you could prove was an active effect in the cosmos and yet wasn't provable. That was the origin point of it all. And creating, as humanity created all these arguments and all these discussions, all these classes, all these sciences, what we tended to forget was what started it was these questions of, when a thunder cracked, why did I feel the way I did? Was that just fear? Well, some people find awe in lightning strikes and thunder cracks. Others find fear. Some are inspired. Others are moved to tears. Same thing with the sunrise and the sunset. Some people like ignore that, others move to tears. Perception. But the one thing in common was, if I could create a sound that could trigger the same thing in me and in others that sunrise triggered, except except everyone would feel it, not just me and a couple of people, but that one guy who says, I don't care about the sunset. What if I was able to get him to actually feel what I feel too? And then the sun started to set, and the old man pulled out his violin, and without saying anything, he played a certain tune. And he watched as that man who never cried before shed his first tears before the setting sun. A moment like that can only exist when when a human being put together the concept that, wait, there was something bigger, something more powerful, something that was more effectual than just speaking, than just showing, than just random action. But I have to go and do and create. And what they realize, if a sound can do it, what if I make the right sound? And what if that right sound could be combined with other sounds and other tools and other methods to create a completely and totally divine experience so powerful that the person that is experiencing it can be utterly changed for the better? There's no remolding of minds here. There's no I'm going to make you believe something new by teaching you this concept. We're talking about the original spirituality here, the original missionary work was, let me perform this thing. You will gain set effect from it. You will then go on to live an enlightened life. And all you'll be able to say is, it was because I was shown better. I was taught better. And not because somebody gave me a class, but because this frequency, this sound just showed me. It just made me feel like I could live a better way. And then I did. The teachings and all of the everything else came after that. Even the Shaolin monks have their martial practice where they're physically basically playing their body like a set of drums until their body hits the right frequency, and then they reach the same meditative spiritual states as the person being worked on by the shaman with his instruments, as the same guy who's up in Mongolia getting throat singing and the sacred spice milk. It's the same thing. The medicine, it's another one they have found with scientific study. NASA for a while started getting this under the Obama administration, started looking at all these shamans and doctors and, or sorry, witch doctors and all these people that science was saying, nah, there's nothing there, it's all just drugs. And they were looking at them like, yeah, but how come we can literally read these holy people, quote unquote, doing things that we can read as a scientific thing, but that scientific concept is being described by their religion as a spiritual one, and yet we're proving it's physically happening, and we have to admit he's doing it scientifically, but we don't want to, because then we'd have to admit the spiritual concept's real. Like, for example, being able to take a person's body and through meditation alone be able to take him to freezing temperature, or almost freezing temperature, where the person needs medical attention, and then himself go all the way up to so hot he's going to need medical attention, and then back to middle where he's normal again. All in the course of a 30-minute meditation, he could full range jump to both sides on front of a camera recorded by the scientists at NASA, wondering how in the heck can a human do this with no outside stimuli. He's just changing his core temperature to these extremes, which means these monks who claim they can go out into the Arctic or go out into the Himalayas or go out into the hottest deserts in the world and just meditate their way through it, and they'll be fine, because somehow they figured out the frequency to do it. And some of these monks, like if you go to the Order of Light in China, they will tell you it's because of sound frequency. Straight up, these ancient order will tell you it's because they learned to make certain sounds with their throat. And that's why you hear the and depending on the temple, the time of day, which ritual they're doing, the will be either really high or really low or somewhere in between. It's because, or the mantra will be a very complicated one versus a very non-complicated one. It's because they're trying to achieve specific frequencies with just the auditory alone. You go to the martial monks, and they're doing the same thing with the way they're punching and kicking the trees, the ground, the air around them. The same thing. They're just achieving frequency. Now, between you and me, have you ever heard a song that made you feel good, or hear a song that made you feel angry, or made you a song that made you feel sad? Well, it's the same process. You're listening to, you're being hit by magic. The quantum forces, the quantum technology that is the throat of the human being, is being utilized in a way that is changing the energy frequency in the room while you're listening to the music itself, that then changes the frequency of the energy in your physical body to a certain standard. I remember listening to, I had a really bad week a bunch of years ago where I just listened to all of my anger music all the time, day after day to day. It seemed like my week just would not get better, and I was just getting angry and angrier. And eventually, I felt so utterly sick and ill, and I realized it was because I was sick of the music. And the music was sick of me, and we were all collectively ill about it. And so when I stopped listening to music, I was like, I'm just going to put on something else, randomly turn on something else, because it wasn't anger anymore, or hate, or any of those negative emotions, because it was a positive emotion at all. It was like a drug. It was like panacea. Like, I was hit with something that made me so high, and I was like, what? I didn't take anything. It was just the music, because I had just dosed myself on so much of this one set of brain chemicals that when the other set finally hit me, it just was a complete extreme to the other side of the experience. And if you haven't had that, I don't encourage you to try it, because oof, that's a heck of a rabbit hole to go down to in any direction. But you can experience tastes of it if you just sit down and really pay attention. How does this music change the way I feel? And just do the experiment. Find some spiritual songs. Like, I'm not talking about like some good old fashioned soul music from the south or anything. I mean, unless you really think that'll affect you. Because the more mainstream you go, the more mainstream you go, honestly. I mean, you're not going to be dealing with anything out of this world or from the other worlds, because most of the music on the mainstream is just primarily reinforcing this world. So if you go to the spiritual music, if you go to some of the mantras that are out there, some of the Hindu songs that are out there, especially the Hindu ones, they're not just playing a random guitar. The kind of guitar or lute that's being played in those spiritual songs was made over the course of 10,000 years to pull off a very specific spiritual event. It is down to a science, their instruments. And if we could take the electric guitar and science it down to exactly what it's good at doing, and just, then that would be great. But I haven't been able to do that yet. So I suggest at least trying that for everybody within the sound of my voice, trying that method out. Go and explore the spiritual music. There's some that to this day I'm just kind of met on, but there's quite a few. There's Danheim is a band that has for many years made Viking music. They've just announced they're going to, over the next 4 years, hit four completely other cultures, including African and Native American. And because they've seen this too, that the magic in music exists in all cultures. It's just as a modern society, we've ignored most of them or suppressed most of them. I think one of the greatest, most human things we can do in this modern age, in the age of AI and the age of machines, and the lack of authenticity, I think the most authentically human thing we can do is learn to play ceremonial music. Because ceremonial music isn't, okay, I have to learn this song and I have to get these tabs and I have to memorize this exact thing. No, it comes from so deep inside you. It comes to the part of your soul that has access to the four worlds. And you can twine them together and deliver them out as something so beautiful, just with the simple tools that are a horn rattle, or a rain stick, or a shamanic drum. You, the sound of your voice, whistling, using your mouth to whistle. For the Christians among us, the one instrument that Jesus played that you can find actually listed in the Bible as Jesus did this was he played his mouth. He whistled. So if you have anything in you that says, hey, I'm a Christian and I love Jesus and I want to emulate that, Jesus whistled. So use your mouth. His most powerful instrument was his voice, and he knew it. The Hebrews and the Jews teach The first letter was the Aleph, because the Aleph was the breath of God. Aleph, the breath of God. So creation starts with the breath. Makes sense that the son of their God would be whistling, because that is actively creating sound with breath. So speak, sing, and whistle. We move over to the Hindus and the pagans. They love to sing, they love to dance, they love to play instruments. Krishna loved his flute. Go, go, go. Find your instrument, find your passion, find the thing that you know. I mean, and for a long time for me, it was making sounds with my throat. It was certain tonal frequencies from my time studying martial arts, learning certain ways to say om, and then feeling the frequency blow through my body and utterly change the way I'm feeling, the chills rolling up my spine and around my head, and just the all these crazy sensations just from a certain tonal frequency uttered in my throat, and then boom, my whole reality starts to shift. That to me was huge. I could be bound in a dungeon, gagged, and as long as I have the use of my throat to make to make just a sound of my throat vibrating, no matter how quiet, I can find the frequency that gets me there. The frequency of love, the frequency of God, the frequency of gratitude. There are different tonal frequencies than just made by your voice. Find them. And in those times where you need that dose, that extra little spike, that little touch of energy of that spectrum, you have it right there in the middle of the night, like, settling your heart after a nightmare. Ooh, that'll do it. Doing some yummy love oming, that'll do it. That'll do it. And the last thing I want to say about that is the best way to utilize these things is in the full comfort of your own space. Use your home. Arrange an altar in your home, in your room, in your closet. If you have one of those situations where you have to kind of hide your practice, put it in your car, in your trunk, in your closet, at the bottom of your sock drawer, under your bed. Make it a mobile altar. Make it the kind of altar it takes you 5 minutes to set up, 5 minutes to put away, but the fact is you have one. That altar is the original space creating tool, because the act of creating the altar, it could be literally I grab my desk that I do everything else on, and I lay down a white towel just because it's all I have as far as pure white cloths are concerned. I lay down a white towel, and then whether or not I have a candle or incense, I put that down. I'll grab the sacred things that are in my house. And so if it's just a couple crystals, I'll grab those, try to do the four directions. If I can't do the four directions, I'll grab the one crystal I have and say, all right, you're my crystal shaman. You're the guru guide of my that is assisting me in my ceremony. And I put him right there. And then we go. If you literally don't even have the crystals, you don't have the totems, you don't have the items, visually create the space. Walk in a big circle or draw the geometry with your finger, expand it with your hands to encompass the space that you're in, whether that's just you or it's all of you, or it's in your room or your group of people or the whole building. Expand the space to encompass that. Om, sing, play your instruments, play your sacred music, all of these things, because what you have done is you've already created the container. You just need to fill it. And right now, the only thing filling it is you and your intentions. Keep on filling it. The great thing about these spaces and containers is you can have it constantly about you and walking through life all the time. And while you're doing that, you can be having your mantra, you can be having your prayer, you can be having your song all in your head, going, because just because you're not physically going doesn't mean mentally you're not creating that. And the thing is, when it comes to mental concepts, the body doesn't know the difference. The same thing with watching a movie. The body doesn't know the difference. All it understands is the nerves in the body are saying things are happening, so I'm going to act like those things are real, because that's all the body does. Your body doesn't fake a stomach ache. You either have one or you don't. You don't fake a headache. You either have a headache or you don't. Your body doesn't lie about those things, and it certainly doesn't play pretend. And so You can be on the bus, you can be at work, all of these places, and you can be doing your sacred space and you can be utilizing your sacred tools. You don't have to explain to anybody that, oh yeah, this is my horn drum or anything like that. You don't have to explain to anybody, oh yeah, I'm hold on, calm down, quiet, leave me alone. I'm playing a shaman song right now in my head. No. Those are meant to become the background music of your game. So keep it that way. The game doesn't stop and explain to you, hey, the BGM is playing right now. It was made by this guy with these instruments, and it's meant to make you feel like this. No, it just plays, and then you just get those. It just interprets because it's background data. The subconscious is meant to play with all those concepts, not the conscious, or else you'd be stuck all day doing talking and discussing and thinking about menial things instead of listening to my videos and talking about these really important spiritual things. So use your space, use your altar space, use the space that you embody with your mind and your physical self to extrapolate on everything I've taught about the four bodies and utilizing instruments to empower yourself, to purify your sacred space, to call upon your spirit guides, your ancestors, and any other sacred deities. Play music, and if you don't have any of these sacred instruments, you can go buy them. There are certain places that have them. But I recommend learning how to build them yourself. There are classes out there. There's online courses. I'm planning on dropping a few myself here. Um, Look for my horn rattle course. But basically, I would highly recommend you bring these into your practice. And the great thing is about these instruments is you don't have to take a class on how to play it. You play it based on what your heart feels like. With the rattling, one thing that I do is I turn on an Ikaro or a sacred song from the shamans in Peru, and I just play the rain stick alongside it or the horn rattle alongside it. Just because by making myself a part of the process, you are now a part of an actual ritual that happened across space and time that space, time, mutable, doesn't matter. In this world of the four bodies, in three of those bodies, space and time are completely mutable, changeable, modular, and deletable. So that means in the one body, the physical body that those things exist in, you can play with them because it's only a fourth of reality is physical. Only a fourth of reality is actually bound by time, which means 1,000 years ago, a previous incarnation of you was probably teaching this same concept to 1,000 years ago, previous incarnation of me who was asking you to tell me what the heck this was, instead of now you're learning it from me the other way around. That's the game that we play in this cosmic creation. Macrocosmically, microcosmically, forward in time, backward in time, nothing connecting at all seems to be tachyons and music in the human heart.